Let me get this up and running. Hello. It was down, it was not University City, University Heights. So it's just south of the 8.
Oh, okay.
Not University City, yeah. So
South of the, oh, like by Hillcrest.
yeah.
Oh, okay. That's
So
weird that you got called way out there.
well, when you're on the negotiating team gets called anywhere in the city.
Oh, okay.
So
Interesting. Well, did you win? Did you negotiate?
we did, we got a match.
Good, good.
So hello everyone, welcome. Good to see you guys.
Thank you.
Right here. Hello,
Hi.
welcome, come on in.
Nice to see the power back on.
I know.
It's not on yesterday. but-
Yeah. Isn't that funny how we will all go to our
No,
seats?
The same seat.
there's gotta be a psychological thing for that.
Oh, for sure.
It happens everywhere, right?
For
This
sure.
is where we chose on that first day. This is where we'll be.
All right, let's see here. Start to share all this.
And I'm waiting for 1 year 2 questions.
I know, it does look like a real owl.
The best part about that owl is when you plug it in.
Does it really?
Oh my God, the first time I did it, I wasn't expecting it. It made my day. It would just goes, it goes. Whoo, whoo.
Oh my God.
So it's great. It's great. All right. We're getting there. We'll give people another minute or two. I know a few people are planning on joining us. Let's see who's here.
Mhm.
All right. I know there's at least a couple more people that are going to be joining us, so we'll wait. We'll wait. I always feel bad waiting. It's a lot later for him. Hi, Jane. How are you? It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's a patient, it's not even one of us.
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. Doing really well.
Jonathan didn't get caught. Nothing's my cat. Oh, Jake is always good. What's it called?
Everything's okay with you after like yesterday?
Yeah, unfortunately, I was discussing this before. Unfortunately, Peter, I work as a negotiator for the police, and I'm usually off in November. But one of the chaplains was sick, and then the other chaplain that was there had worked in an 8-hour shift. And so they needed us to come in and replace them, and so we did. It is not crazy here, right?
Look, as long as nothing was serious.
No, when that happens, that's usually what it is, that I've had to be involved in negotiations, so. The good news is we got him out. It took a sister, a puppy, and a Dr. Pepper, and we got him out.
Okay.
Hello.
I think that's actually a good one. Are you? That is great, but you don't know this yet. I have to wait.
All right,
And I can't.
well, we're gonna get started. Welcome, everyone. Just a reminder, in case I forget to mention it later on, a reminder that we're skipping next week for Thanksgiving week, and then we'll be back the week after. You're coming anyway, enjoy.
Better get a key.
So what are we going to do over these next 2 weeks? We are going to really do a deep dive into the Jewish sources that specifically now deal with abortion. Up until this point in time, we've looked at some Jewish sources at the beginning of life, We looked at some Jewish sources on the concept of rodeh, right, of a pursuer. But now we're going to actually look into the sources that speak about it very, very specifically. And the way that we're going to do it, there's a lot of sources. We're not going to obviously go through all of them. But the way we're going to do it is today, I'm going to try and focus a little bit more on the earlier sources. We're going to look at Talmud. We're going to look at some of the commentaries, some of the law codes. And then in 2 weeks, when we meet again, I'm going to bring the more modern sources. I'm going to bring responsive literature. I'm going to bring what the modern rabbis in the 20th, 21st centuries are saying about it and look at some of those so that we have those in our conversation as well. As always, for those who are online, go ahead and mute yourself if you haven't already, just so we don't get any background. And if you have a question or a comment, please raise your virtual hand. If you raise your hand like this, I won't be able to see you because there's a lot of things that are here. So raise your virtual hand. You'll pop up to the top of my screen, and I will be happy to answer questions as we go. All right. So what are we going to speak about? As I said, today we're going to do Jewish sources specifically on abortion. And I mentioned already that the scope we're going to divide into 2 different sections. I've got ahead of myself here. Today, early Talmudic sources and commentary, next time, modern responsa and rulings. So we're going to dive right in as we go. We've sort of started this conversation in the previous couple of weeks. So as we look at the first Talmudic source, this is from Masechet Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is the actual high court. Was called the Sanhedrin. It was a court of 71 rabbis. Most of Masechet Sanhedrin, most of this section deals with capital crimes, capital punishment, since you needed all 71 rabbis to agree unanimously. You can imagine how often that happened in our history, in order to convict somebody of a capital crime. So that's sort of the context of what we're talking about. But here it says, in the name of Rabbi Ishmael, it was said, a Noahide may be put to death. Who's a Noahide? What's a Noahide?
A non-Jew.
A non-Jew, right? This is a non-Jew, even for the killing of a fetus, right? So obviously, if they kill a human being, right? If they kill somebody that we have established is alive, is living, has been around an adult. You obviously can put them to death. Again, this is capital punishment, what we're talking about here. But here we're actually saying they can actually be put to death for killing of a fetus. And what is Rabbi Ishmael's source? For it is written, one who spills the blood of a person shall have his own blood spilled by another person. And if you look at the Hebrew, right, it actually says, Shafech dam ha'adam bi'adam. It's this weird grammar that says, or this weird phrasing that says, you spill the blood of a person in a person, right, is what it's saying. And so what does that mean? Which is a person inside another person? This is referring to the fetus in a mother's womb, right? So unlike some of the others that we've talked about, here now we're bringing a source that says, wait a second, if you kill a fetus inside of a womb, you can actually be put to death for this. The question is why, and we'll have to figure that out.
There's another question, why are they distinguishing between a Jew and a non-Jew?
Yeah.
So yes, it's a good question. For those who didn't hear, why are they distinguishing between a Jew and a non-Jew? The non-Jew makes it actually a stronger statement, right? Because you can, if this is the case for a non-Jew, it is certainly the case for a Jew, because we don't have access all that often to being able to punish non-Jews, right? So this is actually a stronger statement, not a weaker statement. Okay. Yes, but it's a good question. Any comments on this? And I brought this because I want to remind us, and we started this conversation, this isn't so straightforward. I've had a number of people, say to me, well, I'm not taking the class because I know what the Jewish perspective is. And I said, well, I don't know that I do, right? So it's not so simple. This is is not a simple conversation, folks, and I just want us to be reminded of that. Here we have a source that says very clearly, hey, this is a problem. This is a problem.
And the fetus is all because there is a bet in front of Adam in a person, that's how they.
That's how they're reading it. The
Okay,
Adam,
the whole-
a person in another person, what does that mean? It means a fetus.
Okay.
Right now, one of the, this is very general. This doesn't say why the person killed a woman and her fetus, right? But this obviously, we're not talking about a death here. We're not talking about some of the stuff that we've been talking about before. So it's saying, no, you can't do it. You can't do it. Okay. Here's another one.
Rabbi Kornberg,
Go ahead.
sorry, can I just ask I just want to ask a clarifying question. Here, this is pretty specific in that it's talking about someone outside of the person who is doing harm to the person inside of a person, but it's not saying anything about the choice to harm the person within the person and the harm being done by that. This is all very,
Correct.
messy,
No,
but it's not done
yeah.
by the person.
No, this is not done by the person.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we're gonna move into some other sources. And some of them, by the way, are gonna be a little bit more graphic, and it's just part of our tradition in terms of how we deal with it. But here we have another, this is from Mishnah Arachim. This is actually one earlier strata. The Mishnah was finished around the year 200. The Talmud was finished around the year 500. So this is from the earlier strata. If a woman is about to be executed, they do not wait for her until she gives birth. But if she has already sat on the birth stool, they wait for her until she gives birth. If a woman is executed, one may use her hair. If an animal has been executed, it's forbidden to make any use of it. Don't worry about the last part of it. Those people who study with me know I don't like to cut sources in the middle. I like to give the entire source, even if they're completely non sequiturs, to what we're talking about. So the last part, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. The first part here, what does it say?
It's just the opposite of what we just read.
It's the opposite of what we just read, right? If you have to execute somebody and a woman is pregnant, you don't wait for that woman to give birth. The assumption would be, if this were a human being, a child, inside, you have to wait.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can't kill two at once. So this is now coming from the opposite direction.
And time frame,
I was just gonna ask that, what's the timing between?
We do
these
the two,
things?
yes.
Which one came first?
So actually, this one came first.
The one that we just read.
The one that we're just reading now, the Mishnah, comes before the Talmud. But they're from completely different sections. And so we're going to actually see some Talmud that is going to follow up on this as well and take it in a different direction. Here's another Mishnah. I'm trying to bring some of the earlier sources first. If she miscarries on the 40th day, she need not be concerned that it was a fetus. If she miscarries on the 41st day, she should sit the required number of days for a male and for a female for being a nidah. This is from Masechet Nidah. This has to do with purity, the laws of purity, right? And after a woman gives birth, there is actually a period of time that she is impure, different from being unclean, right? But impure, where she's not supposed to have marital relations, she's not supposed to be in close contact, she's not supposed to come up to the Temple Mount. And so there's actually a difference if it's a male or a female, but the idea is if you have given birth, you go through this status of being impure. But if you, quote unquote, give birth, I'm using this in quotes, before the 40th day, then you're not impure. The idea behind that is up to the 40th day, there is a different status of the fetus than post the 40th day. And it's one of the, right, we were talking about the beginning of life, we were talking about breath, we were talking about birth, but now we're actually going to start to see, are there different stages of pregnancy, and does Judaism actually look at them differently in terms of how we respond to them? Is it better if you're going to have an abortion, or if you're unhappy about the pregnancy, right, to take the morning after pill versus wait until the third or fourth month and get an abortion at that point in time. According to this, we would say, yeah, because up until the 40th day, it's nothing, and we're going to see another source that's going to talk about.
So do we know, did they look at fetuses or that were born, fetuses, because they're not considered?
Yeah.
Before they were born to come up with this, or is this just like random? Do we know?
Yes, no, there actually is a, they looked at miscarriages, they looked at these things to make these determinations.
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay. Let's continue. And we're following up on this. Now, this is from the Talmud. If she is found pregnant until the 40th day, it is only a mere fluid. And this English doesn't do the Hebrew justice or the Aramaic justice. It says Maya be'almahi. It's just water. Right? Again, this idea that prior to the 40th day, it's not even a fetus. But we're having a conversation if you abort a fetus. But prior to the 40th day, it's not even a fetus. By the way, for those people who would argue that life begins at conception, this really speaks against that. And then I mentioned this before, and I know, Julie, you guys, we talked about this before, but this is the actual source from Masechet Gittin. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi holds a fetus is considered kiyerech imo, like the thigh of its mother, a limb of its mother. And it is as though the master transferred ownership of one of her limbs to her, the master meaning God, in this case, right? So, according to this source, you have complete control over the fetus in the same way that you would have control over your own limb. Now, in Jewish law, are you supposed to go and chop off your own arm? No. But if the arm is gangrenous, maybe, yeah, right? If there's a problem, yeah. So this gives us that opening. So we've got a couple of different layers now that we've seen, right? We've got conception to day 40, Maya Ka'alma. It's as if it's just water. Day 40 to birth, right? To when life begins, breathing, right? It's Yerech Ima. It's a limb of the mother.
Rabbi, also, I think it's interesting that there's sort of a implicit autonomy of the woman. It's her limb.
Yes.
It's
Now-
not a limb, it's her limb.
Yes. Now, for as much as I would like to totally agree with you, because it's going to make Sarah really, really happy.
I don't make that.
In terms of that, the reality is that the autonomy that women had over their own person and stuff like that at this time was actually still pretty limited, right? Fathers and husbands still had a lot of say in what happens and all those sorts of things. Now, I don't believe there was ever a case where we saw where the woman wanted to keep the child and the father said no, or the husband said no, you're going to abort it, and we listened, right? So there is that, but it's not quite as rosy as.
No, but I understand that, but even more so than that, it's her limb.
Yes.
If this woman had limited autonomy, she was property of her husband or her father. This is very specifically
It is still hers, yeah,
her limb.
it is.
Right.
Sarah, I'll let you yell at me. Go ahead.
No, but yes, I agree. Here we actually see, no, I don't agree with you. I agree with, I don't know who it was that just spoke. I should clarify. I'm going to disagree with you. Here we actually have it written out that God transfers ownership to a woman. She has full autonomy and decision-making because God has transferred ownership. Granted, not to the entirety of her person, but to one of her limbs. That's ownership. That's autonomy. That's full agency.
I'll give that to you.
I'll take my small wins where I can get them.
Yes,
But unfortunately, then you could say who owns her.
right, well,
unfortunately.
Right, I mean, and look, Judaism is not, there's definitely a difference in status between a slave or an indentured servant and a wife, right? No doubt. But, and there is a lot of autonomy that women have, by the way, within Judaism, and I'm playing this a little bit tongue in cheek with Sarah, because I get just obsessed with it. But, and I love the Jerry. But the reality is that there's also limitations on that, on the decisions, on, you know, vows. This is what we're dealing with right now in Daf Yomi, right, in Masechet Nedarim, that the vows that a woman makes can be undone by her husband or by her father, right? Because ultimately they have that final say on those certain things. And so that is a challenge of that time period that's very different from the way that we look at it. Sarah, did you want to say something? I couldn't see if you're raising your hand.
Sorry, I'm like deciding whether or not I want to get angry and go on a rant or not. But
Okay.
here's my issue with this. Like, okay, so you're telling me that a man can come in and just arbitrarily undo a vow a woman makes, but here we see a physical manifestation of a very serious vow. And here again, we see that God is transferring ownership to women. Why isn't this particular pasuk or this commentary, why isn't this being used to make a larger argument for God giving autonomy to women in the face of women cannot, you know, men can undo women's vows?
Well, historically, it's because it's the men that were making the arguments, and that wasn't in their interest, right?
Oh, you mean to say that women didn't draft any commentary? Huh.
Correct. The question is, in today's day and age, look, this isn't the easiest way to do that, right? There are other ways that actually are easier, and you know, that don't necessarily have to do with this topic about autonomy and about the women's right, and all sorts of things, including, you know, it used to be that a man could divorce a woman against her will. That you can't do that, right? In the Middle Ages, Rabbi Gershon came in. So there are things that have come in where our tradition has changed and have given women a lot more say and a lot more autonomy. This just isn't the easiest way to do that. It just happens to be connected to our topic. Okay. Onward. Here's another interesting source. This is now a later source. This is from the Mishnah Torah. The Mishnah Torah is the law code that was written by Maimonides. So now we're talking about the year 1000, right? So about 500 years later than the Talmud sources that we were looking at. But it's the first attempt that we have to codify the law. Now, interestingly enough, by the way, it was a real problem for the rabbis at the time, since nobody had ever done it before. Anybody who's read a law code knows that here's the law, here's what it is, no explanation, no proof text, no nothing. That's not the way our tradition goes. Our tradition is all about, well, this rabbi said, and this rabbi said, and here's the conversation, and here's the biblical verse that supports it. And when Maimonides came out and did this, he upset a lot of people, so much so that in some places of the world he was excommunicated, and his book was burned. Mishnah Torah was burned. Now, we today, with historical hindsight, look back and say, this is Rambam, this is Maimonides. But they didn't actually realize how amazing he was until after his death, and they went, hey, this is actually a pretty good idea. This makes a lot more sense than having to dig through all this other stuff to get our laws. So just some historical background on this. So this is a section dealing with avadim, dealing with slaves or indentured servants, right? In terms of what the laws of that were. By the way, when he was writing this, there were no more slaves. There were no more indentured servants, right? This was Middle Ages already, early Middle Ages, but Middle Ages. But he still codified the law that was on the books in the Torah. And so that's why we're looking at this. When a master composes a bill of release for his maidservant who is pregnant, stating, you are free, but your child to be remains a slave, his words are binding. He can actually do that. Why? And by the way, he can do that only if she conceived while she was a slave. right? If she came in pregnant, then then that child goes out with her. But if she conceived while she was a slave, then that child then becomes an indentured servant as well and isn't set free. If, however, it states you remain a maidservant, but your child is to go free, it's of no consequence. For this is if he freed half of the maidservant using a legal document, right? It's like, that makes no sense, right? This isn't a child yet. So you can't free something that isn't a human being yet. And therefore, it's another source from a later source, but another source that is like, this isn't a human being yet. We start to see this now being codified. All right, so now let's actually come and deal with abortion specifically. Okay, my apologies for those who have a little bit of a weak stomach as we go through this. This now is from the earlier strata. This is from Mishnah. So again, around the year 200. A woman who's having trouble giving birth, right? They cut up the fetus inside her and take it out limb by limb because her life comes before its life. If most of it had come out already, they do not touch it because we do not push off one life for another. We talked about this a little bit, but this is where it comes from. This idea of if a woman's life is in danger, and that's what we're going to see. That's what it means, right? That she's having difficulty giving birth, meaning at that time, difficulty giving birth meant very often both the mother and child would die. But so that's what we're talking about here. The woman's life is potentially in danger. And you can go and abort at that time. Let's think about this. What month are we talking about?
9th month.
9th month. Right? Labor. And there's no doubt, one would say, that if everything went well, this child would be sustainable in the world because that's part of, like, ready to be born. And yet you have the right to go in because the woman's life takes precedence. Why? We learn the term. Because this child is over death. Right? This child ultimately is a pursuer that is going to harm the mother, and the mother has the right to defend herself and her life from this child. But this actually says a little bit stronger. This says her life takes precedence. It's not actually using the term death. And I would argue this source is even a stronger source than the Radev source because of it. Sarah.
Just to again be clear, so if the mother actually said, no, please save the child's life and not my own, that request would be disregarded?
According to this, yes.
Okay.
That is not a choice. Right? Yes. According to this, you save the mother's life.
No matter what she would want or
No
be able
matter
to
what she would want at that point.
Okay.
Right? No matter what she would want. This is how the rabbis would rule it.
So much for autonomy.
Well,
Yeah, so there's a choice to, you can abort the baby, but not a choice to keep it.
there's not a choice to die for your fetus. There is a choice to die potentially for your child. That's a different issue, right? You know, a parent can protect their child even at the end of their life. But because at this point in time, this child is considered a yera imo, a limb, in the same way that a doctor would say to you, you've got gangrene on your foot, we need to amputate it, and you say, I don't want to. Like, is that really a choice? I mean, in today's world, of course that's a choice. You have the right to say whatever you want, but no. Like, the doctor's not gonna let you do that. You give up your own life for a limb.
But in a patriarchal world, you could see why they would do that, because the mother's life would be more important to them, probably, than the child's life.
I think if we look at it cynically, right, we would say potentially the mother could have another child,
Or should
Right.
they have children?
or she may already have children, and that, you know, and therefore that's more important, and this child, you know, you can make another one, you know? But not necessarily, right? You know, we know a lot of times that when labor gets this difficult, if you do a procedure like that, chances are the woman's ability to bear children after that, especially at that time, is pretty minimal. I can't imagine that those procedures happen with a lot of success, so, Howie, go ahead. But you're muted, I think. There
No,
you go.
I'm on my phone. Yeah, I'm on my phone, so it's a little slow. Now, if you read the quote, doesn't it implicitly imply that the baby in utero is a full life? It says her life becomes before its life.
I'm just checking to make sure the Hebrew parallels the English, and it does, right? Mivnei shechayeha kodmin lechaya. So yes, but I think my argument would be here, they're talking about its potential life, because if it is born, it's going to be alive, but not yet, according to
Yeah, but that's reading into it. This seems pretty clear that there are two distinct entities here, and you need to terminate one of them, but as a separate entity.
I don't know that it's as clear as you're making it, but I would agree with you that it could absolutely be read that way.
And Rob, I don't know why that would actually lessen the impact. Let's just go at what Howie's saying, that it's a life.
Mhm.
The rabbi's bottom line are still saying the mother comes before.
The mother comes before.
Right, even if now we intellectualize it, it's a life.
Yeah, I agree with that.
The mother still comes before,
I agree with that.
unless, you know, the majority of the body is at, but.
Right, which we're gonna get to now. So the next level is, so how do we?
It doesn't change the paradigm.
Correct. I would agree. Yeah. So let's figure out now what that means, right? So if the head emerged, this is a Talmudic source, right? If the head emerged, we do not touch him, since we do not put away one life for another, right? So if the head is already out, we say that child is born, right? By the way, the rabbis will also say if it's breech and a majority of the body comes out, the child is also born. Doesn't say that here, but just to put that out, especially since they didn't have the abilities to deal with breaches in the same way that we do. They didn't have external versions and all those sorts of things to move things around, right? But then the Gemara asks an interesting question here, but why? Right? Even though this child is now alive, isn't it still a rodef?
And the child hasn't taken a breath.
Well, you could argue potentially the child can if the head's out. Now, whether it has or hasn't, but it can, right?
I guess.
But once that child is born, then we say, okay, we don't put one life over the other, right? But the Gemara is asking, I think, a valid question. We learned about a rodef, and that's two adult human beings, right? You have the right to defend yourself, right? A pursuer who is chasing him to kill him. He says he is a Jew and a child of the covenant. But the Torah said, the one who sheds blood shall his own blood be shed, meaning save the blood of the pursued by the blood of the pursuer. So the Gemara basically comes and says, yeah, but still, this is the line that they're going to make in this case, right? You still don't, if you shed blood, it's going to be a problem. And since this is now a living being, and I've heard an argument, and I don't know if I fully accept it, but I've heard an argument to say that the child actually can't defend itself. The idea of a rodef is, okay, right, if Saul is coming to kill me, I can defend myself and kill Saul, but if Saul is better than me, I'm still gonna die, because Saul can defend himself too, right? There's a little bit more parity there, and that life can defend itself, whereas this child who has now been born cannot defend itself, and therefore there's a disparity there, and that's why this particular Gemara came. That's one of the explanations that I've heard for this. Okay, so Rashi, who is one of our commentators, is going to take our Sanhedrin text that we just did and try to explain it for us a little bit more. With a woman that is expecting difficulty giving birth and experiencing, thank you, difficulty giving birth and is in danger. Now, by the way, Rashi is adding these important words to this, right? It's not just this is hard, because frankly, every woman I've talked to has said that, right? It's not an easy process, right? So it's not just, oh, this is hard. But no, there's a danger aspect of it. So Rashi is actually bringing that out and making that clear. And it is taught in the first section of this teaching, the midwife extends her hands and cuts up and extracts the pieces. The entire time that it has not gone out into the environment of the world, it is not a soul. Now Rashi is saying it's not alive yet. And so it is possible to kill it, and he's using the word kill. If it's not alive, are you really killing? But yeah, he's still using that term, and save its mother. But when its head came out, we cannot touch it to kill it, as it is like a born baby, and we do not push off one soul for the sake of another. So Rashi is just explaining it, but I want you to see, he adds the danger factor in there clearly, and I think is trying to make this a little bit more clear as to why we do this. Sarah.
Is it possible they're also just trying to offer some practical cover for midwives to ensure that they would still be willing to intervene and assist with difficult births? Because I could see if a midwife is about to get pinned for every difficult decision that's made, save the life of the mother, doing this type of gruesome work. If they aren't covered somehow, then they wouldn't do it at all.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think this is, to some degree, that's what law is supposed to do, right? Law is supposed to protect people who are doing the right thing and punish people who are not doing the right thing, right? And so, yes, I think this is there to help protect the midwives to some degree as well.
And we're going to assume the midwife didn't have malpractice insurance.
No, not so much. Not so much. Go ahead.
Is there any reason why they use the words push off? Because I'm not sure if this is something that was considered back then, but like once the child is born, kind of forgetting about it, placing it into foster care, like discarding the child.
Yeah, so it's a good literal translation of the Hebrew, but the English doesn't do it justice. So the Hebrew that they're trying to translate is the last couple of words. Ve'ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh. Doche means to push off or to push away or to move aside, right? So we don't move aside one life for another life, is kind of what they're saying here. It's not quite the putting off in the way that you were describing. Good question. All right, any other questions as we continue through here? All right, let's keep going. So we're now starting to clarify. We've obviously now we're digging deep into this idea of the woman's life. The woman is in danger, having difficulty, even into the 9th month. We can abort this child. If that means cutting it up piece by piece, right? That's what it means. Pretty graphic and gruesome, right? Because the mother's life takes precedence here. But Rashi is trying to say this is specifically if there's a danger. And the word he uses is misukanet, right? It's misukan in Hebrew means danger. Okay. Now we're going to skip ahead to the law code, right? So now we're back at the law code. Murder and preservation of life is the name of this chapter, right? That's what we're dealing with here. This is indeed one of the negative mitzvot, not to take pity on the life of a rodef. We're having a conversation about a rodef, right? And they kind of bring up this idea of, well, like, shouldn't somebody have pity on this Rodef? Maybe he's in there and he's trying to kill, because he's broken into your house because he's hungry. Right? Shouldn't we take pity on this person? Is the overall conversation that's going on here. And his response is no, we don't take pity on a Rodef. This is a choice that they've made on how they're going to deal with that situation. On that basis, the sage ruled, when complications arrive and a pregnant woman cannot give birth. It's a little interesting, by the way, and they changed the words again. Pregnant woman cannot give birth. This idea of like this birth is going to end up in the death of the woman. It's a little stronger, I think, than just in danger. It is permitted to abort the fetus in her womb, whether with a knife or with drugs. Right, as we move forward into the modern world, right? But the fetus is considered a Rodef of its mother. And then it just follows on. If the head of the fetus emerges, it should not be touched, because one life should not be sacrificed for another. They changed the word from put off to sacrifice for you. Although the mother may die, this is the nature of the world. At a certain point in time, we sort of let things happen naturally the way that it's going to once the child is mostly out.
Rabbi, the sources you brought in earlier kept on going back to 40 days, or two different sources, 40 days. The Rambam is not qualifying it at all. 40 days, 6 months, 9 months.
No, but I brought those sources because I think the Rambam would say, if you have a choice, right, to do it earlier. The problem is a woman's life is not going to be in danger, usually, in the first 40 days.
Right, so, no, I'm sure he would agree that it would be better to do it before 40 days.
Correct.
But at this point, if this is the law, this is the code, he's not.
Correct. He's basically saying from day 1 to day birth, right? You can do this if we get to a point where the woman's life is in danger. So, by the way, in the modern world, we can make an argument, we could create a scenario to say, a woman gets pregnant and the doctors are going to say, look, you are, because of your medical history, you are not going to survive a pregnancy. Right? And knowing that early on, the Rambam would say, well, take care of it at day 40, don't wait until day 9 months plus. I think everybody would agree with that. The earlier, the better, as we do this. Michael Frank is asking the question, is there no consideration of intent? A fetus can be branded a Rodef even without intent to do harm. That is correct, actually. And if you remember the laws that we studied about Rodef, if somebody is tunneling into your house, you're allowed to use lethal force, even if you're unsure that that's their intent to kill you. But we are making an assumption that that is their intent. And we walked through that whole argument last time. So if a woman's life is in danger, you can make the assumption that this baby is going to kill, right? And therefore we can respond to it. Sarah.
I'm just curious if there's any further clarification about what complications means. Because complications it feels very broad, and I feel like there's a lot of room for interpretation there.
The problem is, I bring these from Sefaria, so different people translate differently. So this is actually the same wording as maksheleled, having difficulty giving birth, as the last source. They just translated it into the English differently.
Okay.
But the wording is the same. It's identical.
Okay.
So difficulty would be something medical then.
So currently, right, that's what we're talking about, is something medical. Now, for those of you here, the question was, would difficulty be something medical? What we're talking about here is a medical threat to this woman's life. We are going to bring up, and in the next session, when we talk about the modern world, we start talking about issues of rape and incest and those sorts of things. We're going to talk about, ability to provide for a child. There's all sorts of different things that are now going to come in that are going to make this much less clear. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you the clear, everybody in Judaism agrees. If the mother's life is in danger, you save the mom, even at the risk of the fetus. There's no dissension at all in that. Even the sources we had earlier that said this was a life, they still say you can do it. Right?
And that would be the only consideration at this time.
And that would be the only consideration at this time. They did not take into account mental health and those sorts of issues in the same way that we do today. For sure.
Because I think is in danger is different than having difficulty giving birth. Like having difficulty giving birth seems very medical, but is in danger can be a lot broader.
So look, I mean, I could, and there have been rabbis, colleagues who could very easily say, you know, the victim of a rape is going to have a lot of difficulty giving birth to this child. Now, is that a medical issue? No. But they're going to have a lot of difficulty. I could say that. I could make that argument, right? That it's not that they're in danger. They're not misukenim. It's not dangerous, but it's maksheh. This is going to be hard to give birth to this child because of the mental toll that this is going to take potentially, right? Let's talk about diseases, right? Which is a whole other layer of all of this, right? If you know that your child has, your fetus has a disease that is going to be fatal, right? Can you abort the child? Most people, for a lot of these absolutely fatal diseases, will say yes, with the exception of possibly the ultra-Orthodox.
You don't think they take Tay-Sachs test, the ultra-Orthodox?
They do, but whether you can abort with that, different rabbanim give different responses. There are some who will say yes, but there are some who will say no, right? As opposed to something like Down syndrome, right? Which is not fatal, that's going to become a much more difficult issue, right? That's going to become a much more difficult issue. And so as we move into the last two sessions, some of these, this is going to be our conversations. Well, what does it mean for this? I'm trying to lay the groundwork in this as clear as I can, so that when it gets murky, it's not even murkier as we go. I saw a hand go up, but I don't know who was.
It was me, but you started talking about it, so.
Okay. All right, let's continue. So now we're actually going to look at a Mishnah Gemara together. We looked at part of it, but I want, this is going to sort of specify and lay the groundwork for the codes later on. In the case of a pregnant woman who is taken by the court to be executed, the court does not wait to execute her until she gives birth. Rather, she is killed immediately. But with regard to a woman who is taken to be executed, who sat in the travailing chair, it's the special chair, which, by the way, with the exception of us here in the United States, there are a lot of people, a lot of parts of the world who give birth in very different positions than we do, because laying on your back is actually not the best way to do this, right? And so this birthing chair actually is a much more natural way to give birth, and frankly easier. Then the court waits until she gives birth. So we've had that Mishnah before, but now I want the Gemara to come in, the next layer, and talk about this. Isn't it obvious that the court executes the pregnant woman rather than waiting? After all, it is part of her body. Doesn't get clearer than that, folks. Right? But the Gemara is going to answer and says, well, it was necessary for the Mishnah to teach this, because it might have entered your mind, and this is a very Talmudic way of arguing, right? They did this because if they wouldn't, we would have made a mistake. That's going to be the argument structure, right? It might have entered your mind to say, since it's written, and if men strive together, and they hurt a woman with a child, so that her offspring depart, she will be fined, as the woman's husband shall place upon him. The fetus is considered to be the property of the husband, right? So I was saving this for you, Sarah, because I knew that we were going to get to this. So let's go through this, and then we'll come back and talk about it, right? which is, it actually says it's part of her body, but you might have made a mistake and said, actually, no, it belongs to the husband, because doesn't her entire body belong to the husband?
Which is what I said.
Right? Therefore, we say this, we have to teach this. If so, the court should wait until she gives birth before executing her and not cause him, the husband, to lose the fetus. Right? Because if it's his property, now the court shouldn't be doing something that will take away his property for her crime. Consequently, the Mishnah teaches us that the court does not take this factor into account. Right? In other words, this is part of her body, not his. This is not his property. Sarah, do you want to jump in? There's more to it, but.
Yes, because this is so contradictory, because if women are the property of men, and if a woman is harmed, the woman does not seek recourse and redress. It is the husband who receives the fine or the punishment and is able to benefit from it, so to speak, not women. But here you're actually saying that women suddenly have autonomy over this.
So there are lots of things that actually a woman brings into the marriage, and a woman actually does have autonomy over, both financially, property-wise, and stuff like that. It's actually a big part of what we were studying recently in Masechet Ketubah, Daf Yomi, of what does a woman take into the marriage with her that she can then keep? What does the husband get? What is the husband not allowed to take? And it's not so clear cut. And there actually are a significant amount of protections for a woman, especially if it comes to divorce. So, okay, you're married, you basically pull your accounts together. But if you get a divorce, then does the wife get to take, the ex-wife get to take what she brought in with her back out? There are a lot of cases where that's yes. So it's not quite so awful as we think, but there still is, the assumption is that women don't have the capacity, which is what bothers me the most, right? The women don't have the capacity to make these decisions. Therefore, the husband's going to make it for her.
But here suddenly women have autonomy over this
Yeah,
specific
we're not
thing.
entirely done with this yet, but yeah, yes, they do. They do. It doesn't go to him. Or you shouldn't delay the execution. Now, of course, I mean, how much autonomy does this poor woman have to the execution, right? But she wouldn't.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to claim victory over, but this is a very small victory.
Yeah, but you know, the fact that we don't say, oh, this belongs to the husband is pretty explicit. It's hers.
Until the baby is born, and then it goes back to being the property of the husband.
Well, then it goes back to being a child, yeah. So you have to deal with children, how children are looked at in Judaism. Yeah.
Fascinating.
So moving on, right? Rabbi Abahu states that Rabbi Yochanan says, the verse says, if a man be found lying with a woman married to a husband, then they shall both of them die. The man that lay with the woman and the woman. So now we're going to bring a different source here. So now we've got adultery happening. Both of them die. The man and the woman both die, at least according to Deuteronomy. The amplifying term, both of them, serves to add her fetus, because now we're talking about this case, right? So the assumption is she laid with this other person, now she's pregnant. It's been found that they committed adultery. The guy she slept with, that's easy. He's going to be killed. He's done. She, do we wait? Do we not wait? That's kind of what they're saying here, right? And it says no. They both die together because the fetus is part of her. Gemara asks, but wait a second. This phrase is required for another law. Neither of the two adulterers mentioned in the verse is punished until both of them are equal. In other words, they both have reached maturity. So if this is a situation where there's an adult and a minor, then it creates all sorts of problems because you can't execute a minor. So does that play into, well, is the fetus a minor? Right? Can you execute the fetus? Can you not execute the fetus, right? You see how this is getting muddy and muddy and muddy as we go through. And the rabbis love to do this. Right? The Gemara answers, when you say the child also dies, it's derived from the word also, whereas the halacha that they must be equal is learned from the word both of them. What's basically going on here is the rabbis have a hang-up about using one verse to derive two different laws. Because they believe that every verse has a purpose. Or one word in a verse to derive two different laws. So what they basically said here is you can derive both of these laws from this verse, because one law is derived from the word also, and one law is derived from the word both, the words both of them. That's all that's going on here. But this is what I wanted to get to. The Mishnah teaches, with regard to a woman who's to be taken, executed, taken on the chair, on the birthing chair. In the throes of labor, the court waits to execute her until she gives birth. The Gemara asks, what is the reason for delaying the execution in this case? The Gemara answers, once a fetus uproots from its place and begins to leave the woman's body, it is considered to be an independent body and may not be killed with the mother. So this is a little bit earlier. This is not all the way out. But once the fetus is starting to make its way out, coming out of the womb. Now, I will tell you that the law really says, it goes back to, how do we know when that really is? When the head is out or majority of the body is. But this leaves open for a little bit earlier. Like once that labor, it's not just labor is happening, right? But once the woman is dilated and the child is now moving through the birth canal. Now we hold it. Now we hold it. This last little bit is also interesting. I left it in there just because I like to leave things in. As I said, Rabbi David says, the Shmuel says, in the case of a pregnant woman who is taken to the court to be executed, one strikes her opposite the womb, i.e. on the abdomen, so the fetus dies first, so that she not suffer disgrace of the result of publicly bleeding from labor. So there's another aspect to this, which is kind of weird, but very interesting. And it's kind of, it's an interesting question to ask how this plays in. If we know that she's going to die, right? Do we put her through labor and all of that and then kill her? Or do we actually say, no, we're going to kill both of you, but how do we make sure that both of you are dead? We actually kill the fetus first, then kill the mother.
How common was this? That
Oh, this is totally uncommon.
Yeah.
This is not happened very, very often. But again, part of what the rabbis did in the Talmud is try to set the boundaries of what law was. Even if it wasn't something that happened all the time, they still sort of say, Jewish law is less about this is what you need to do, and more about you need to stay in this playing field, right? If you're in this playing field, you're okay. Once you go out, now we've got a problem. And so that's why you see a lot of arguments in the absurd and those sorts of arguments, because you're trying to see where it stops, where that border is. And you look over it. Sometimes in order to do that, you go over it and you go, oh no, that was too far. Come back. As we go.
Do you know what law says now when the murder of a pregnant woman comes out single homicide to a double homicide?
Well, the only places that would make a difference, civil law or in Israel law?
No, I just mean the criminal law here.
The criminal law here, I don't know. I don't know if we have any lawyers on that can say that. I don't believe it's a double homicide, although given what's going on in our country today, who knows what it's going to be and what people are going to be charged with moving forward. Although I really do like the woman who got a ticket for being pregnant in the carpool lane in one of these states and said, you can't have it both ways. Either this is a person or it's not a person, like make a choice. If it's a person, then I'm going to do the carpool lane.
High occupancy vehicle.
Yeah.
Rabbi, I think Scott Peterson who was convicted of murdering his wife,
Yes.
pregnant wife, was actually also convicted of murdering the fetus, which is unusual in California of all places.
Yeah.
But I mean, we should look that up afterwards, but I think his wife was pregnant 8 months or 7 months, and I think he was also, there was some kind of charges against murdering the
It could be,
fetus.
neither of our two lawyers are with us tonight that I can see, so,
I think it's 22 weeks, but I'll double.
yeah, but, Howie, you had a question, yes, your hand up.
It's that phone thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my phone thing. So it's the same thing. I mean, I understand the priority of the woman's life over the baby or over the fetus's life. But there seems to be here the same thing that I saw in the previous verse, where there's an acknowledgement of two separate entities. Even the concept of rodef isn't, a limb can't be a rodef.
I think there's a knowledge of two separate entities. The question is whether those entities are equal and whether one entity is seen as being an independent living human being or not.
No, understand. Yeah. But I mean, I think it's, I mean, I can see it coming in our later discussions, but I think that it's important to see that there is this, I see this theme of how do we deal with two competing entities rather than how do you deal with the permission of
Look, it
removing
is
a limb.
definitely different than saying it's a limb of the mother,
Right.
right? That is different. I agree with that. This is a different line of thought.
That being said, if I was a halachic Jew and I was going to my rabbi for all my decisions and I had to hear what you said, my leg was gangrene.
Mhm.
And I said, I don't want to remove my leg. But I'm going to ask my rabbi. I bet you the rabbi would say that leg is rodef.
Yeah,
That leg, that
the
limb,
rabbi would say you must.
because that is
Yes,
endangering your life.
yes, absolutely.
But Saul, the leg isn't rodef. Rodef is, I don't know that that's accurate. Like a rodef, a limb can't be a rodef.
Listen, my rabbi in Muncie said it is, so there you go. So stop contradicting me.
Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I was gonna ask about the case, like a case now in modern times in United States, that this seems to answer, where somebody, past 20 weeks, which could easily happen, the baby dies, right? And from what I understand, the laws that were passed right now in some states make it illegal to abort the fetus that has died, that doctors, that it's
Look, by the
illegal.
way,
That's an issue. But
yeah,
I don't know for sure if that's true, but it seems to me that this answers that and says, no, that is absolutely fine.
well, look, it answers that in a lot of different ways, right? Let's for purposes of argument, let's say this child is alive and has a soul at conception, which is not our position, right? But that child doesn't have died, then nobody should have a problem removing that child because it's not alive anymore. Right? That's the piece of the argument, right, that I really don't get. I can disagree. I can disagree philosophically, theologically, and all these things with my Christian colleagues on when life begins. And yes, that does have a difference in our argument of abortion. But to say that the medical procedure of removing a fetus that is dead from a woman should be prohibited makes no sense in any argument that they make.
Of
Because
course,
it's not about
of
the life of
course
the
it makes
child.
no sense.
Right.
It makes no sense. There's no lawyers, but isn't that the case? Isn't that the case
Yes,
though?
I don't know all of the laws of those states of what they are. I did hear that. I don't know how valid. I know that there were, I know that there was a case of a woman who was on the news who said that she tried to go and get this procedure done and she wasn't able to have it. Now, the question is, was she not able to have it because the law said she couldn't? Was she not able to have it because none of the doctors were willing to touch it with a 10-foot pole because it's so political?
Right.
right? So I don't know the reason behind it. So that's part of the issue. Sarah, go ahead.
I want to go back to this idea of a mother's life taking precedence over the child's life. And I guess I'm still thinking about like what it could look like in terms of what the complications might be. I know that's not the actual translation, but just this idea that we have a precedent on the books that there can be circumstances in which the mother's life, if it is in some way threatened, takes precedence over the life of the fetus. I'm just curious if that's something that is going to be a recurring theme, if we're going to see that come up in the modern text, because I'm imagining with a more modern adaptation and interpretation of some of these texts, that gets really messy when asking what constitutes a legitimate threat.
Yeah, it does. And depending on how you define that will depend then on how you understand these other things. So if you say that the mother's life takes precedence, it's going to be a lot easier to argue that the mental health of the mother, right, should weigh in on this. Because there's a precedence issue now that we're talking about. If you're going to say that that's not the case, that's going to be a much more difficult argument to make as we move forward. Any other questions or comments? And then, as I said, next time we will start to see some of the more modern sources. It'll go into the early 20th century. Don't think I have anything from the 19th century that we're going to show, but certainly some of the response in the 20th century, and start to set the stage for the reality that the medicine that they were looking at back then and the medicine that we're looking at now is just different, right? And that is both a support for those who are pro-choice and actually a bit of a challenge, right? Because you can make an argument that the mother's life is a lot less in danger today than it was back then, right? Mortality in childbirth was scary high at these times for a lot of different reasons, right? Most importantly, sanitation, right? And infection and all of those sorts of things. So if we're going to say that the woman's life being in danger is the sole factor in our conversation, it actually is going to limit our ability today to really talk about it, because the times that a woman's life is truly in danger, especially if she's in a medical facility, is actually very few. It happens, but it's very few. Because usually, especially the ability to do C-sections, emergency C-sections, right? That takes a lot of this out of play.
So is in danger only defined as medical death, or? So
far, that's how we're defining it. Now, the argument is going to be made, what about mental health and all those sorts of things? That's part of our conversation for the new rule.
So let's say in danger would mean loss of some kind of function, right? Like getting paralyzed or something. Would that?
No. Interestingly enough, I think the rabbis would struggle with it.
Does it only mean death?
It means death or likely death.
But how do they, why? Is there a source for that?
Well, that's going to be part of our conversation, is that what it should continue to mean? And there will be a number of rabbis that say, yeah, that's what it means.
But why, but how do we know that's what they meant?
Well, because if you use the argument for death, you're really only supposed to use lethal force if your life is in danger.
Life in danger. Yeah, but life in danger, see, that's still the same thing. You could think of it being in danger. Why does it have to be death?
It's the way that the rabbis understand it. Let's have that conversation. Let's talk about it with the new sources.
Yeah, Rabbi, I get the local for reasons that are important. The Kentucky Jewish local newspaper.
Really?
We won't go into that.
We can talk about that. It's a long time. I don't care.
There are 4 Jewish women in Louisville who are bringing a suit against the laws in Kentucky because they claim it infringes on their religious freedom. A whole different take. They're not doing pro-choice, they're just saying, you're impinging on my religious
This is
freedom.
a big conversation right now among progressive rabbis.
Yeah.
Of is this really an angle that we can and should take? And, you know, it's difficult because we rabbis like to think we're lawyers, but we're not. And so, you know, there are a lot of rabbis now that are speaking with legal counsel about whether or not this is an avenue to try and bring cases that potentially could get up to the Supreme Court and address this, right? Because this is now
Infringement.
an infringement, yeah, it's an infringement on
Religious freedom.
on religious freedom, right? Which is a constitutional piece of it, so it can go up to the Supreme Court as an angle. Now,
But there are other religions too that take their thing.
agreed, and
So it's not just-
by the way, and that's part of the conversation is, should we be doing this just as Jews? Should we be
Yeah.
getting together with other religions? How to manage that? But this group of people is kind of the first foray to test the waters a little bit and see sort of how the lower courts react to it and whether or not it may make its way all the way up. Yeah.
I know we gotta get going, but I know that, you know, we can torture statistics and data and even, translation, you know, to say what we want it to say. And we're citing resources and all the resources in here, you know, when life starts, does it still boil down to perspective and opinion? I mean, is there a right answer?
Let's save that until the end of this class.
I mean, because it just, everything looks like, opinion.
Right, look, I would argue there is a Jewish value-based opinion. Now, there's some, like I said, everybody's gonna agree, there is no dissension that if a woman's life is in danger, you abort.
So that's not opinion,
That's not an opinion.
right, that's
Right.
pretty clear.
The opinion is going to be, what does danger mean? And what constitutes danger? And how do we define it? And that's where the opinion piece is going to come out. So the law is there, but look, the reason the lawyers have a job is because just because the law is there doesn't mean it's pretty straightforward.
And I wonder if it's mandatory Jewish law, because if it was left up to the mother, they would try.
It's really, it is questionable. Yeah, I mean, that is a very interesting, you know, the maternal instinct, so to speak. You could argue, and I don't think it's always true, but you could argue the maternal instinct is going to be my life over my child's, right? And that decision is taken out, at least in the sources we saw. In that decision is taken out of the hands of the mom, taken out of the hands of everybody. Right? It goes back to the conversation we had the other day. It's not about choice. Right? It's not about choice. All right, all. It is great to see you 2 weeks. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone.
You too. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Because, the link was incorrect for the class on Wednesday.
Okay.
I asked Bonnie about recording, but